Hello there, everyone. This is Notorious from PixelJudge.com, and today we've got a lovely interview with Steve Gaynor, who is the founder of the Fullbright Company and makers of the newly released Gone Home. How are you doing, Steve? You all right?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Good to be here.
Excellent, excellent. Right then. So you've got quite an experienced team with you at Fullbright, and the burning question really is, what drove you to go out on your own and form the Fullbright Company in the first place?
I think a lot of it was just that, we had all worked together on BioShock stuff for a lot of years, and I had basically just spent a lot of time on, big budget games, really huge productions, and um, there's a lot of really cool stuff about that. Like a lot of people play your games, and having all those resources and everything is exciting. You can do really cool stuff, but on the other hand, there's a lot of things you can't do when you're working at that scale. And you know, when games are that big, there are a lot of limitations just by way of like genre. It's like you're gonna make something that big. It's gonna be some kind of action shooter game. It's gonna be something that has like a really broad mass appeal, and it just seemed really attractive to say, okay, if we start our own thing and we work smaller and there aren't all these expectations that come along with it, we can do something different that we might not have the opportunity to ever do when you're working in like AAA.
Yeah. Excellent. And Gone Home being your first game and newly released, what made you want to tell the story of Gone Home, and what was your inspirations behind it?
A lot of it came from so Gone Home is a very it's a lot different from other stuff that we've worked on in a lot of ways, but also it really comes from those games conceptually and just as far as like how it's built and how we tell the story. Because we wanted to make a game that drew from our experience as game developers, something that we were good at. And so BioShock has the nonlinear exploration and finding the story in the environment, finding the audio diaries and the atmosphere and kind of immersive nature of those games. Those are all really exciting aspects to us, but also those games have a lot of other stuff going on. Like finding the story in the environment is what you do when you're not shooting dudes. And between the practical considerations of we're a very small team and we can't really build a whole city or build a game that competes with AAA games just on pure production values. It was like we needed to focus and say we want to see what happens if we can make that story exploration the whole game and make it all focused on one very specific location that's really dense and believable that you spend the entire game in. And so, when we made those decisions, we were like, well, what is the place and what is the story and what can we do with these, limitations that we've put on ourselves? And something that has been really cool is just when you do remove so much of the expected stuff from the game, like when you do remove, like, oh, who are you going to be fighting or where the crazy puzzles come from or how do I level up or whatever, you can really talk about subject matter. You can make your game about stuff that is otherwise really hard to talk about. Like it's really hard to say how do you tell a story about just a normal family in a house when you're shooting guys every 5 minutes, right? And so for us, it was kind of like, okay, we decided what the game is, like what you're going to be doing interactively, and that lets us tell this story just about a family. And from that point, it was figuring out, well, who are the individuals and what's the conflict and like what happened to them that you're going to be discovering.
Yeah, cool. Well, you mentioned a couple of times BioShock, and of course that you and other members of your team have worked on BioShock prior to Gone Home. How did those experiences really affect the development of Gone Home and the other games that you've worked on? Were there any specific games that you drew an inspiration from, or
Yeah, like I mean, our inspirations and kind of the approach that we come from. definitely comes from that whole lineage of games that were made by, Looking Glass and Iron Storm Austin and Irrational, the System Shock games and Thief and Deus Ex and all those games that are about, fulfilling this role in a very immersive, very internally consistent, like very interactive world, and making that relationship with the game world feel very compelling. Just to, be in the world and interacting with stuff and exploring the space, and starting from that point of that kind of very what's the word I'm looking for? Like a rigorous kind of approach to making a game interactive and saying we're not going to take control away from you and show you a cutscene, and we're not have a bunch of special case stuff. There's like any QTs and that kind of stuff, right? And then applying that to a very different role, because in the games that are our inspirations, you're fulfilling the role of, like a cybernetic hacker or a thief with supernatural powers or a guy, that has plasmids and machine guns and stuff. Whereas we were saying, we want to take those principles of interactivity and how you make a game, but apply it to a totally different setting and then figure out what that means.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the setting and it being set in the mid 90s, what made you decide on the mid 90s? Was there a personal or nostalgic reason for why you chose that particular decade or?
Only a little bit. I mean, it was mostly another, an answer to another very practical question of just we want to make this game that's about finding all these bits and pieces of story around this house and opening up drawers and finding notes and all that kind of stuff. And if it takes place in the present, then there's cell phones and there's email and the story ends up being in all of these devices, and it's like why can't I just call my parents on their cell phone, and so for us a big part of it was like how little can we rewind the clock because we wanted to have the game take place in a time that felt contemporary and relatable and that people that took place in a time that players had lived through and could remember and that felt familiar for that reason, but yeah, not one where the game we wanted to make was short circuited by the technology. um, so we were like, okay, in 1995, the family might not have internet, and might not have a home computer or internet connectivity yet, so everything is written out by hand and people are leaving messages for each other and taking down answering machine messages on the notepad and all that kind of stuff. And then at that point it was like, okay, well, now we have to really commit to the time period and sell it and make it really feel like you're in a different time and feel like this is the 90s that you're playing in. But like most of the creative decisions in the game, they didn't first and foremost come from the point of view of, oh, we want to set it in the 90s just because we like the 90s, so let's figure out how to do that. It was kind of the other way around.
Ah, right. And did that once you decided, that's where it had to be set, did you find any unexpected problems that kind of occurred halfway through? Was there anything you put in and then thought, we can't do that, it's the 90s? Or
It was it was mostly a process of constantly, like doing the research and making sure that we weren't doing anything anachronistic. Really, it was like we want to have a poster on the wall that is from a music festival, and so we have to do the research to make sure that the bands that we put on there would have really been on the bill of a show like that, 1995, and like, oh, this band's album hadn't actually come out until at the end of that year, so they wouldn't have been on the radio yet, and stuff like that, or researching what time and what would have been on TV in the TV guide, or just all that kind of stuff to make sure like something that we actually patched in so we released the game, and something that there's a lot of dates in the game, and like, oh, this happened on September 12th or something, and we did our best to try to make all of those line up and make sense and be in chronological order, and we did a good job of that, just in the sense of um everything basically, except for a couple of things we missed, happened in the right order chronologically. But a player wrote in, and I had tried to keep an eye on this, but I didn't do enough job, and was like, this date when Lonnie got suspended from school in 1994 would have been a Sunday, or like that, that kind of stuff. And so we actually, when we patched the game, we changed a bunch of the dates by like a day or two, to make sure that it would actually make sense that this was on a school day, and this would have been a day that mom was working, or so there are a bunch of little things, but there wasn't anything really really big.
Yeah.
The
You can
best stuff.
always trust the internet to do that, can't
Yeah,
you?
I mean, the best stuff was stuff that we kind of discovered, or remembered after the fact, that was like, oh yeah, we could put this in because it's the 90s, as opposed to the other way around. Like when a friend of ours suggested the Magic Eye thing, the stereoscopic images. They're like, I bet that would, if you put those in. We were like, wow, I bet you're right.
Yeah, that was a
I
good
was like,
idea actually. That was one thing I particularly liked was
yeah,
the magic eye thing. Yeah, that was good. And it
yeah.
worked.
Yeah, I know, and that was, I didn't even know if it would, but I gave it a shot, and there we are. So that was really cool. Yeah, that was our friend Alice O'Connor who had the idea for that and threw it in. And so anyway, there were a lot of opportunities, I think, because of the time period, as many as there were restrictions. Well, the restrictions were the things that we wanted.
Yeah,
No cell phones
of
was a
course.
restriction we wanted. So
Um, well, you talking about the research, how long did it take you to do that sort of research? And did it did you find yourself delving into something unexpected? Did anything crop up while you were conducting that sort of research or?
um, I mean, it was mostly ongoing. There was early on, I did story research stuff, just reading books and whatever. And early on, we bought a Sears home catalog off of eBay from 1990, and it's just this, you know, I don't know, 600 page color catalog that has everything that a suburban American home in the early 90s would have had in it. So that was, those kinds of artifacts were really good and really useful, because especially for Kate, our 3D artist, she just had had this big book that was like, all right, I need an end table that the family would have bought, so there's 20 of them in this book, and I know that they're all period appropriate, because this was actually what people were buying. Time. Um, but most of the research was not really like, oh, we'll do a bunch of research up front and then make the game. It was more of this iterative process of, okay, now we need this other. We're going to put this kind of thing in the game. What would that actually have looked like? If it was printed, then. But yeah, I don't think that there were any like big, huge surprises. It was more, like it was all stuff that we had lived through, and so, if anything, it was cool to be just reminded of the fact of, oh yeah, I remember how that used to be. When you had to look it back up.
Yeah, excellent. You mentioned the community, and it was a player that spoke to you about the dates and things. I mean, the community have really got behind you on this game, and the support's been quite staggering, really. Um, how much of an impact has the gaming community had on the development? I mean, was it just the odd thing here and there, or have you made any, big changes? Or
Well, over the course of development, we released stuff here and there, but mostly we Gone Home is a game that is very self-contained. It's a fairly short game, and it's sort of meant to stand on its own. So we didn't do a lot publicly while we were developing the game, but we did have a lot of um, game developer friends that we knew that we did play tests with all throughout the development. And, they told us their input on, oh, this doesn't make sense, or I got lost here, here's a bug, or it seems like it'd be better if you did this, that, or the other thing. And those were all really, really valuable comments to have because it's just other talented people that make games giving us their opinions so that they were making our game better by playing it, which was awesome. I guess post release, one really cool thing has been that we set it up so that fans can translate the game themselves. Like all of the text in the game is just in text files that you can edit, and then you can put them in a zip file and distribute them. Um, and it's been really cool because we have fan translations of the game that have been created just by the community of like I think 6 or 7 different languages now. It's like uh, French, Italian, German, Spanish. There's Korean and Portuguese and Czech. It's so that has been really awesome to see because we're a very small team and we weren't able to do our own local. We could set up the system for localization for doing all the content before we launched. Was something we were able to invest in, and then seeing the players, be enthusiastic enough to say, I speak Portuguese and I could play through this game because I speak English as well, but I want to do a translation so more people can play it. Like that's been really cool to see that people picked up on that and have been running with it and making that content and getting it out there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. To be fair, it's one of those things we found having that kind of network is just you can't put a price on that, can you really? Um, and I did notice that you'd had that sort of support on your site. Yeah. Um, was there anything? I mean, the story of Gone Home is really quite intense. And was there any particular impact that you plan to have on the player and the communities? Was there any sort of message that you were hoping to put across with the story?
I don't think message would be how I would put it though. So something that's been interesting to me is that when you are working on a game, you don't have an outsider's perspective on it, So, um, we're putting everything together, and it all came together, in a kind of holistic way. Like we didn't just build it end to end, and a lot of it was not developed in a super how should I say, like calculated way. It was sort of like layers. The game was coming together in bits and pieces and layers as we went along, so everything added up at the end to what we had. But I've had a lot. There have been a lot of people who have talked about how how scary the game seems at the beginning, or how like stressed out they were when they were going up towards the attic at the end, and how they just felt like this terrible sense of dread, and that it was super intense, and it felt very very crafted to be that. And in all honesty, it was not as consciously crafted and kind of set up to create those exact feelings in a very intentional way from my end. It was really just the sum of all the little things that we had put in the game that pushed in that direction. But it's really interesting seeing it from the the developer's standpoint, which is just sort of like, well, we were making this thing and we kept adding stuff into it until we were done. And then from the player standpoint, where all you see is the finished product, and so it feels like, oh, and then they did all this stuff to try and make me feel this one specific way at this one specific moment. And it wasn't that for us, and so it's been really interesting to see the perception of of kind of the arc of the game and the feelings that people got out of different points in it that in a lot of cases have been very consistent. Like a ton of people have talked about how scared they were to go into the attic at the end and everything. And I think that's it's cool and it's interesting, especially since the actual pieces of the game are very mundane. It's like people didn't feel scared to go in the attic because we were playing a bunch of like haunted house scary sound effects at them, or like putting blood splatters on the wall or anything. It was because they were invested in the story, and I think that's really cool. Um, but as far as like a message, I never had a yeah, it was never like a message first game at all. I mean, my biggest desire as the writer was just to make characters that you care about and to tell a story that you think is interesting and that you naturally want to get to the end of because you your natural curiosity makes you invested in it, and that we actually pay that off and make it worth your time when you do play through to the end. But the there wasn't really any greater thrust to it than that, and hopefully making you feel some empathy towards the characters, since the whole game is about getting to know these people and giving you the ability to understand who they are as people. So hopefully, if players play through and they feel some connection there, then we've been successful on that front.
Definitely. I mean, having said what you did about the way the player felt, I was exactly the same. When you first walk into that house, you feel that sense of dread, and you sit there thinking, when are we going to have the jump scares? When's something going to jump out? When are the lights going to go off? Or something along those lines, and you find yourself easing into a more relaxed feeling as you go through. But there's little things like there's one point in the game where you walk into the bathroom and you suddenly go, oh, there's blood in the bath. And then you realise that it's hair dye. And those little things were just so well placed and well spaced out throughout the story, I thought. And again, the walking into the attic, that was one of the, you always knew it was going to end in the attic. That was where it was going to tie it up. But I don't want to spoil it for anyone, so I won't go too far into the ending. But did you always know that Sam was going to get the ending she did, or were you toying with any alternative endings?
No, yeah, we didn't know the specifics of what we were going to do with the ending until like a couple weeks before we went into the recording studio with the actress to record the final set of voice diaries, because we built the game in two halves, right? Like the when we started in March of last year, and there's the Independent Games Festival at GDC, which is a competition every year at the Game Developers Conference, where you can enter your game and hopefully it gets nominated and get to be at GDC if your game is a finalist and everything. And so that was about 6 months out from when we started. So we made the decision, okay, we'll have IGF entry be our first big milestone, and we'll build like the first part of the game to a fairly good level of polish, like kind of a beta level of completion. So we can enter it into this thing, and people will be able to get an idea of what we're doing, and so on and so forth. And so we built the whole first half of the game, or first hour about of the game in that time, and did our first voice recording round with Sarah Grayson, our voice actress, and got all that stuff finished. And very intentionally, we're like, we're not going to really think about the second half of the game until we're finished with this with this part one. Uh, we had some really basic ideas, but we didn't know how the characters' stories were going to end, and we didn't know exactly what spaces, what parts of the house you're going to go to in what order, and all that kind of stuff until we had already gotten the first part finished. And so then we had to go through that whole process again of saying, well, we've got the first part of the house, and now we need to, you know, block out the layout for the second half of the house and decide what parts of the story are going to go where and what happens in what order. And so yeah, it was this process of discovery of figuring things out as we went along, and there were other ideas for the ending, and the ending was never, like super dark. The ending was never, like everybody dies or something. But there were prior versions that were kind of more melancholy and more of a downer than what we shipped. And I was working on it and I was writing it, and I didn't like the way that it was going, and so it was a real challenge to figure out, okay, what is the ending that is interesting, not because the characters are forced apart, but because the obstacles they have to overcome, like mostly within themselves and their own thinking and their own desires, are are interesting enough that them being together is its own interesting reward. And putting those obstacles into place to say, like, okay, what are they overcoming, and how is it like a surprising, interesting ending? Um, and so that that took a long time. And like the only really big thing that we added in to the first part after the fact was the concept of Lonnie being in JROTC and going to the army and everything, because that had been part of her character for a long time. But through Carla and my story discussions, as we were working on the rest of the game, we realized that would be something that would be interesting, that would kind of give her this thing that was in her future that seemed inescapable, and would just be one more factor towards all the questions that get resolved with them.
Lovely. So finally, um, it's quite obvious that the future is bright for the Fullbright Company. And I'll be honest, we're at Pixel Judge. We're quite excited to see what other plans you have for the future. What sort of plans do you have for the future? And have you got any things up your sleeve you might want to let slip? Or
Well, I mean, we're still investigating stuff for to support Gone Home and extend Gone Home. Like, we're interested in, like, consoles and in like the Oculus Rift, but we're investigating all that stuff, and we don't know yet whether we can for sure support those platforms. But if we can be on PlayStation 4, or yeah, have Oculus support, like that'd be really cool. So we're looking into that, but we don't have anything to announce for that. And we're working on some a little bit of free downloadable content for Gone Home. Not anything that's like a new part of the house or anything, but just sort of some free update stuff, kind of so that players who pick up the game later will get more value, and players that bought the game already, they'll get this stuff for free. So it'll be a reason to go back and look around the house a little bit more. But aside from that, it's going to be figuring out what our next project is, and not getting to work on that too soon, because we could all use a break. But but after we've had some time to recharge, just yeah, figuring out how we take what we've done, extend it and expand it, and make a new kind of experience, for us to to stay excited about as developers. So we're not just doing more of the same, but also so players, um, yeah, will have something that feels really different, from us, and can see kind of what other territory we can cover, starting from the point of what we
yeah,
got on screen with
excellent.
Gone Home.
It strikes me that the Fulbright company is going to produce a lot of things that are completely different, and yeah, we're very excited anyway. And thank you very much for for giving us Gone Home and for this interview. I hope that everything goes well
Thank you.
with the game, and please keep us informed on anything else you have in the future.
All right, I will. It's been great talking.
You too, mate. Thank you very much, Steve.
All right, bye bye.
Ta-da.
Sometimes you just have to lie to mom.